Luffy has had many legendary mentors throughout his journey, Garp, Rayleigh, and even Hyogoro. But what if he was taught by the strongest of them all? What if Luffy was raised by Whitebeard in the Grand Line? Let's find out. For this to happen, we'll have to go back in time and begin right where Shanks lost his arm and left Luffy at Fuchsia Village to go on his journey. This time around, Garp will be furious at the effect Shanks had on Luffy, and instead of giving him to Daden, he'll make Luffy tag along with him to Marineford. Now, as we know, the world government has the technology to pass through the calm belt by this point in time, so that's the route Garp's ship takes. However, instead of being hounded by sea beasts, the ship is hit by a storm. Luffy snatches the opportunity in the chaos and decides to take a small boat from the ship to escape into the new world. Garp is unbothered, however, by the time he realizes that Luffy is missing. He had already sailed deep into the territory of Whitebeard. Marco, while helping his own division, spots Luffy and lands directly on his boat. Luffy asks him if he knows Shanks, which surprises Marco, prompting him to make fun of the fledgling and what a pipsqueak he was during his days with Gold Roger. This intrigues Luffy as he didn't know Shanks sailed with Roger. However, he doesn't take the insult kindly and tries to punch Marco with his devil fruit power. Marco easily dodges his attacks, but decides to carry him to Whitebeard to show him what he found. Luffy's first meeting with Whitebeard goes extremely bad, as once again Luffy tries to assert that Shanks is a better pirate than them. Whitebeard, having had enough of Luffy's nonsense, decides to ask him one last time if he would concede to him and join his crew and become part of his family. However, Luffy refuses without even a second thought. Spotting Luffy's toughness and his devil fruit powers, Whitebeard had already decided to take him under his wing, hook or by crook. Whitebeard asks Jozu to throw Luffy off the boat and teach him a lesson so that he understands the peril he'd have to face in the Grand Line. As soon as Jozu was about to drop Luffy into the ocean, a deep sense of fear struck Luffy as he realized that he wouldn't be able to meet Shanks if he drowned there, which resulted in him releasing his Conqueror's Haki. The Haki knocks out many of Whitebeard's crew and gives Luffy time to get loose from Jozu's grip. Whitebeard gets up from his chair and proclaims that he has found a diamond and that he'll polish him to become even greater. Whitebeard catches Luffy and gives him a proposition. If Luffy is able to train under his commanders and defeat him, he'll ship him off to Shanks himself, and if he isn't able to do so, he'll have to keep fighting until he does, however long it takes. Thus begins the training of Luffy, who would be known to be the son of the strongest pirate to exist in the Grand Line. Whitebeard explains to Luffy about the different forms of Haki and how he could master them. However, unlike his journey originally, Blackbeard trains Luffy to rely much more on his Haki rather than his devil fruit for his main source of power, giving the example of Shanks and Roger. The training under Whitebeard and his commanders is brutal, which makes Luffy almost as strong as a Yonko captain by the time he is at age 15. He learns to control his strength and mix his Haki from Whitebeard himself, knocking back the strongest man at some occasion. However, Haki and punching is not the only thing he learns. He even picks up a bit of sword fighting from Vista and masters the double sword to a certain extent. Finally, he learns to infuse his Haki into his muscles and bones, taking the help of his flexibility by Marco's guidance, unlocking Gear 2, 3, and 4 much earlier. Luffy's unlocking of Gear 4 here is very different, as its sole purpose was to let him fly like Marco. However, Luffy soon discovers that just coating his bouncy body with armament Haki and then using it to fly and hit would be even better. Now, as Luffy grows up, he trains under the Whitebeard and attains immense strength. However, his crew, which he meticulously, or rather, I'd say miraculously put together, goes into peril at their homes. Zoro flees Captain Morgan's captivity and ultimately fights Mihawk. However, with no influence from Luffy and his lack of loyalty to anyone, Zoro is able to impress him enough for him, the greatest swordsman, to take him under his wing. Sanji is prematurely attacked by the Germa 66. However, he escapes and finds shelter with the Revolutionary Army along with Dragon and Sabo while the Bharati is destroyed. Usopp, who is not very fortunate, dies at the hands of Captain Kuro in Syrup Village while trying to save Kaya. Nami, on the other hand, gets captured by the Marines through Arlong's involvement. However, during captivity, she finds out that Jinbei let Arlong run free and wreak havoc in her hometown, and vows to confront him for the sins he indirectly committed. Chopper still aids Kureha at Drum Island, while Robin assists Crocodile to successfully take control of Arabasta and imprison King Cobra and Princess Vivi. Frankie ventures out on the Grand Line to evade capture from CP0, as he still has the blueprints to Pluton, while Brook is successfully able to reclaim his shadow from Gecko Moria and leave the Misty Sea. And finally, Jabei is still working under Big Mom to provide and protect the Fishman Island from constant peril. However, Destiny had always written for the Straw Hat crew to unite in their their futures. So a chain of events 12 years later forces all the pieces to fall together and make the crew unite at Sabaody. Luffy, who had been sent on a mission across the Grand Line to investigate the flow of artificial devil fruit from a captured Tontada slave, bumps into Zoro, who was there to fetch Mihawk some of his prized wines. And although Luffy and Zoro are strangers, they have an eerie sense of brotherhood that stops them from getting into a skirmish and actually helps each other. Luffy, who isn't interested in anything but meat, helps Zoro find the wine he's looking for. However, Luffy is very cautious when Zoro asks what he is doing in Sabaody. Luffy makes up a lie about him being from a not so well known Straw Hat crew and that he needs to get an old buddy out of Sabaody before he is sold into slavery. Zoro is skeptical but agrees, as he is eager to see a celestial dragon who was rumored to visit the slave auction frequently. They arrive at the auction and Luffy instantly spots Leo, who is in line to be sold. Zoro starts bidding for him. However, they get into a bidding war with none other than St. Charles, who's got his eye on Leo. Luffy, actually being smart, suggests that they should just stop and steal Leo from behind without anyone noticing. However, a menacing smile spreads across Zoro's face as he reveals that Mihawk asked him to never stand against a celestial dragon, but he really wants to see if the celestial dragons are humans. He wanted to find out if they bleed just like the others. Before Luffy could even convince Zoro to retreat, he unleashed a slash, cutting off St. Charles along with his sister and father. As the stands explode into hysteria, only 9 people are left standing in a stoic fashion, knowing very well what comes next. Those 9 people were Sanji, who had come on a mission to kidnap Leo as well; Nami, who was looking for a coding guy to finally go to the Fishman Island; Soge King, a brave warrior of the sea who had a miraculous survival story from East Blue; Brook, the wandering musician; Frankie, the cyborg; Robin, the Duchess of Alabasta; and Chopper, a timid yet intelligent reindeer. All 9 of these people stare into each other, knowing full well what was about to come next, as they had practically declared all-out war on the world government. このままじゃ今までの俺と同じだ。人生変えに来てんだよ。